There are at least two big sources of pressure on liberal education, and you can tell the story at many different levels of complexity, but at a fairly high level of complexity, there are these two big forces. One is an increased vocationalization of education, that is, an increased emphasis that education ought to be practical, that education ought to be about professionalizing, about making a career. And we see that everywhere. There is a shrinking of funding and availability for liberal arts, an emphasis on technical education, vocational education, pre-professional education. And that is a large, broad cultural phenomenon. We live in a free market society where values of productivity, efficiency, and the cash value of everything is front and center. So there is a kind of fight against the cultural stream. So that's one big source of resistance. Another is more kind of cultural and ideological. There are people who feel that a traditional liberal arts curriculum is not appropriate for the kind of diversity that we have in our student body. Mm-hmm. That is, that as we have had more minorities, more immigrants, more people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, more first-generation students.
More women.
That curriculum, that education is no longer appropriate for that population. And I am sympathetic to that, and I can see how intuitive that notion is. But there is a very profound danger, a danger that sometimes I associate with a kind of condescension that says that these thinkers that have been so influential in shaping our contemporary world are not really accessible, do not really speak to the human experience of our diverse student body. And that is just a fundamental misconception.
Let me just pause there for a second to repeat that, because that's an extremely important idea. You said that there's an idea that the ideas of the authors in the core curriculum are somehow fundamentally inaccessible to minorities or to women, and that you're both sympathetic to a certain extent, but also think it's fundamentally misguided. Did I understand that correctly?
That is absolutely right. Let me give you, I'll give you two examples. One is my own. When I read figures like Plato and St. Augustine and Montaigne, they connected with some of the profoundest parts of myself. And I saw myself reflected in those writers, not because they were Dominican, not because they shared my cultural heritage, but because they shared something of my own human experience and illuminated it in a particular way. I also connect with writers that are from my own cultural background, but not at the expense or exclusively those writers. A second example, it's a student I had a couple of years ago. I every summer I teach in a program for rising high school seniors. So this summer between junior and senior year, and they are all low-income students from low-income families whose families didn't go to college. So they will be the first ones to go to college in their family. I had a student, a girl from Harlem, who had grown up in foster homes, whose mother had, drug addiction problem, just about as tough a circumstance as you can imagine growing up in. Well, this really extraordinary young woman shows up in the classroom, and we read Socrates' Apology and Credo of Socrates, and she found herself affirmed and spoken to by the figure of Socrates. And she ended up going to liberal arts college. She graduated a year ago with a major in philosophy, receiving prizes at graduation that explicitly compared her to Socrates, right?
Wow.
She saw in that figure and in that intellectual experience a profound sense of affirmation. those are just examples of the way in which the power that these ideas, figures, texts have is not circumscribed by class or culture. The reason why they are important is precisely because they transcend the limitations of class and culture from which they come. My contemporary students, Italian Americans, they don't have a special insight into Dante. Dante doesn't speak to them in some peculiar way that it doesn't speak to me because I'm Dominican. That's just simply not the case.